all the preparatory notes for the right moment to do the right thing don't work because you cannot identify the right moment. Whenever I get excited that I'm going to win a game, it goes badly. In the 10th standard, I became national champion for the first time. When I finished my 12th, I became a Grandmaster. And then when I finished my BCom, I was number 5 in the world.
Our first speaker tonight, and we we often celebrate the very accomplished without necessarily knowing what goes into that particular accomplishment. And I have just a small statistic that might kind of help if we need any more help grasping the sheer genius of Viswanathan Anand's accomplishments. It is this, that at this point approximately in the world there are 800 to 900 million chess players, of which there are only 1680 grandmasters. I think that's a statistically non-existent population, but now from among that, from the time that the world governing chess body started holding world championships in 1948, there have only been 15 world champions. From that, Viswanathan Anand has been world champion 5 times. He is, of course, India's finest chess player. He was India's first grandmaster. He is, of course, routinely rated among the absolute finest the sport has ever seen, alongside names like Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov. But I don't think any of them exemplify his accomplishment as much as the fact that he has earned the awe, the respect, and the fear of opponents around the world. But before all that, he demonstrated to us a country in which nobody before him had ever become grandmaster, let alone aspired to be world champion. At age 6, when he was, or I don't know if it was age 6, but when he was very young, he was reportedly asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he said, "World champion." On that note, it's a pleasure to invite one of those rare people who make their ambition and their dream come true, Viswanathan Anand. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I wanted to start by actually something I think you said somewhere, which is to say, I did not choose to play chess. I would have had to choose not to play it.
That's fine.
Would you tell us what you meant by that?
Well, I was often asked whether I considered other careers. And the honest answer is, I became a chess player at the age of 6. And by the time I was 7, I had started to follow the usual routine, which is to read chess books as soon as they arrived, think about chess a lot, go to the chess club every chance I could to play against someone. It just is a kind of addiction. And what I meant by that is simply that even though at some point there might have come a practical moment to take the decision, should I look at something else, or is chess going to be enough? I was very lucky that in the 10th standard, I became national champion for the first time. When I finished my 12th, I became a Grandmaster. And then when I finished my BCom, I was number 5 in the world. And so at all the moments when I might have hesitated between maybe this was fun, but I should think about something else, the feedback from chess was very good. So I had almost no anxious moments. I mean, this is a problem for many sports people, that they come to these moments and they hesitate. Is this what I'd want to do with the rest of my life? That sort of thing. But for me, it seemed like it was beckoning. But from the inside, taking aside practical considerations, you would have had to convince me to quit, because I was a chess player from 6.
What about it at age 6 or 7? What was it that kept you going back? You said it was almost like an addiction. Is it possible to isolate what was the nature of that addiction? What did it do for you?
I think part of it is sitting there playing against your opponent and trying to outfox them. And just the joy when the opponent gives up or resigns. The other thing is the game itself was endlessly fascinating. It still is. Just when you think you understand something, there's some more detail to learn. And I think that's what hooks you.
So, what does it take? And I think the phrase that we've used before is excellence without precedent. it's one thing to say, okay, people play chess, I want to be the finest in the world. In this country, nobody had become a grandmaster. The culture of playing chess at the world level did not exist. Why did you have the audacity to imagine that you could be the finest in the world at what there was no precedent for doing in this country at all?
Well, from my point of view, it seemed like this. I loved playing chess, and I just wanted to see how far I would go. If I had stopped much earlier, I would have been happy with that too, because already by the age of 13 or 14, I was breaking all sorts of records within India. And my World Junior title, for instance, was the first from an Asian. My Grandmaster title was the first for an Indian. And already at that stage, I might have looked back successfully that's where it ended. But in a way, I kept going, and it was just a wonderful journey, that's all.
So when you did say when you were very young you wanted to be world champion, what did world champion mean to you? What would it have signified to you?
I gave that answer when I was 14 and I was playing in the Asian Junior Championship in Hong Kong. I remember it quite well. I think it was just an innocent answer. It seemed like the sort of thing you should aim for. Yeah, of course I want to become world champion, and I had no idea what was involved in the process or anything. So, but it's that childlike innocence that sometimes you struggle to recreate much later. So. Clearly, I had that going.
Like you said, you had no idea what it takes. I think we often also from the outside, particularly for sports like chess, where it's not necessarily possible to see the rigor. You can see the rigor of, say, a lot of physical sports. Will you tell us maybe a couple of things that one may not grasp about chess from the outside, but its challenges from the inside, or its demands or its commitments from the inside that are not visible on the outside?
Well, I think when you're playing against someone, the main challenge is to get into that person's head. The typical quotes that you hear from great players, I felt like my life came to an end. I felt worthless. This sort of the language that people use when they lose, and when they win, they just feel euphoric. It's because I think when you're playing for a reasonable enough stake, your self-worth is entirely tied to the game. It takes a while afterwards for you to forget that and settle back down. At the chessboard itself, the main struggle is just outwitting your opponent mentally. You're trying to guess what they're going to do, they're trying to guess what you're going to do, and both of you are looking for every clue in the position to be able to figure that out. And in a way, it's a competition between what your sense of the pieces are, what you were able to learn and absorb, and what you're then able to execute on your own at the board. I mean, we can use all the sophisticated tools we want at training, but at the board, you are alone in a sense. Most chess players, I think at the end of a game, feel like some part of them went with that game as well. So the level of involvement is incredibly high.
Is there a correlation between intelligence and chess? It is, of course, considered to be, because it's a mind game, as you mentioned, but a lot of, I think, while standardized IQ tests are not necessarily a measure of intelligence, an absolute measure, a lot of chess players have a very, very high IQ on those tests. And I think even if now at the current, whatever, lists of the world's top 25 smartest people, there are at least 3 chess players. Mm-hmm. What is that correlation between intelligence and chess?
Well, that's a tricky question. I mean, even in chess, we're not completely sure do intelligent people choose to play chess, or does chess develop intelligence? First of all, I should say, chess is a certain kind of intelligence. It is typically, I think, can be associated with some spatial intelligence. It's chess players tend to have very good memories, whether that's due to years of training or they brought it to the table, it's hard to say, but They tend to have very good memories. A lot of them who leave chess and move to other professions tend to do well at universities or in the financial world or technological fields. So you can see a sort of, I wouldn't say STEM necessarily, but you can see that correlation. But equally, I know many chess players who are very good at languages or a few with musical skills and so on. Generally, chess players are not associated with the emotional skills, emotional intelligence. They tend to be loners. So I think they fit a profile rather, and it's a certain kind of intelligence.
And yet, because you said that it's a mind game, a lot of it is about outwitting the opponent. Doesn't that not require a quality of, let's just say, emotional, being in sync or being able to read the emotions of the opponent?
Yes, that's true. But I'm not sure how much you can take it outside of chess. I mean, we learn to read a chessboard and use that to guess our opponent. That doesn't immediately go outside. One of the stories I mentioned in my book, actually, is in 98. I mean, chess players are supposed to have an excellent memory and so on. In 98, my wife once told me that she had put something in the safe because I had forgotten to, and she said, the code is very easy to remember. It's 2706. And I actually seriously explained to her that chess ratings had now started to be rounded off to 5 and 10. And so 2706 was not very easy for me to remember. And then she really looked shocked and said, it's our anniversary. And so, no, and I have this experience that there are some phone numbers I remember well and some things I remember well. But equally, my memory for other things is all over the place. So it's a special kind of intelligence, and it's narrower than you think. But yes, it is intelligence.
So you have said that at some point, and you said it now also, that chess at a certain point is won and lost often in the head. Is it possible to isolate, is how much of that is, say, attitude, how much of that is skill, and how much of that is quite simply mental strength?
I mean, with the worst attitude, the worst physical condition thing, I would say something like a 500 or 600 point gap in ratings, in rankings. I should win that game anyway. So clearly there's a skill gap. But the skill gap has to be pretty large. I know from personal experience that the days I'm not in control of my emotions, which means sometimes you're too eager to win, sometimes you're too pessimistic, anything that tends to being unstable, and therefore you're unable to concentrate, or you're in a very bad mood due to something that happened, or you couldn't sleep, any number of factors. It's amazing how many games you can lose in that situation when the skill gap isn't that overwhelming. So the baseline is skill, but as you get closer to each other in strength, I think attitude and especially confidence is the most important. We joke sometimes that it's better to be confident because you misunderstood everything rather than to be pessimistic because you understood everything. So it's better to play a bad position absolutely confident because at least then you have some hope. Whereas if you're phenomenally talented and you can see everything's going wrong and you can't fake a little bit of confidence, there's not much use. The willingness to take punishment. You should say to yourself, today, no matter how long the game takes, I'm going to sit and solve difficult problems because my opponent will keep on giving them to me, and I'm going to try and enjoy it. Well, then sometimes it even ends in a positive result. So all these kinds of, the mental makeup you bring to the game becomes decisive because nothing else is separating you. And this you'll yourself feel the moment when this mental attitude results in a mistake on the chessboard, which then decides the game.
Is there a particular example that from your life that you feel where that particular attitude made the difference in a game where otherwise, where your attitude versus the others won you the game, where there was no real skill gap?
I can think of several. So the most important one, I'll start off with Topalov. This was in game 12. We were tied 5.5 each, and by the way, this was is a long part of the book because of the nature of the match. But so we got to the last game, and the only difference, it seems to me now, was that I went into this game with a completely new opening because we'd been having problems settling into the match. So we went into this game with a completely new opening, and I was happy to take whatever result the game offered. As it subsequently turned out, Topalov had started to think about what would happen if he drew that game. So what would happen was, if we drew the regular games, then we would go into tie breaks, which is a much faster time control. So instead of 2 hours and all that, we would play a half-an-hour game. And my score with Topalov was, I think, just slightly negative at that point in the slow format. But in the rapid formats, I was plus 15 or something like that. I mean, just a huge gap. In fact, I hadn't even thought of that, but I just played that game very calmly. And at some point, he started to take completely unacceptable risks. And then he crossed that point of no return. I remember this from many knockout competitions that I played earlier, is that you should never be afraid of the next game. That is, you shouldn't gamble unrealistically in one game because you're not confident you'll win the next game, because the next game hasn't even started yet. You should be trying to be as objective as possible in this. And the way I told myself this is that no matter how badly I think the odds are stacked, gambling now doesn't put me in a better situation than any future game where even there's some skill mismatch in the format or whatever. Whereas Topalov seems to have had that thought circulating in his head. He's strong enough to know that it shouldn't affect him, but there comes a moment in the game when you step over the boundary, and this turned out to be decisive in that match. In '98, I fought back in quite an unfair match against Karpov to tie, and we went into tie breaks. And again, my score with Karpov is as good in the rapid format as it was with Topalov. But exactly in these two games, when I got a winning position in the first rapid game, I suddenly felt euphoric. I felt that this is for you. This is for all the political maneuvering you did and everything, and you got yourself these unfair conditions, and look, I'm going to beat you now. And in about 5 or 6 moves, I suddenly had a lost position. So I played very badly. And this is something that repeats itself again and again and again. Whenever I get excited that I'm going to win a game, it goes badly. So these are cases when you should mentally tell yourself, or you should just have that discipline to not think of the coming thing. But sometimes a result which is unexpected can produce such happiness that it's very difficult to control yourself. I mean, these are just typical, two the biggest examples I can remember, but I can come up with dozens.
So did you always have high objectivity about your strengths, and by which I mean not just skills in the game, but temperament strengths? Because it seems to me that you need a very clear understanding, as you've just demonstrated. When I get excited, I tend to lose because whatever, I preempt the victory, and so. Did you always have a clear understanding of your strengths, or do you rely on others to give it to you? Is it difficult to hear from other people, because along with strengths, then they will also tell you weaknesses, I imagine?
I think most chess players have some sort of, let's say, painful chronology of what their strengths and weaknesses are. You just build this up. But having said that, the chessboard is more mysterious than that. It sounds easy to tell yourself before the game that, when the crunch moment comes, I should remind myself of the sort of things that go wrong. But your mind can play tricks on you. When the crunch moment comes, your mind can come up with a completely plausible explanation. I mean, chess moves and variations. to convince you that no such thing is happening. It's very hard to pinpoint the moment at which there's a breakdown in logic in your head, and it's very difficult to know in advance when it's going to hit you. And that is the problem. So when you're thinking clearly, you will identify this moment better and better. But when you're not thinking clearly, all the preparatory notes for the right moment to do the right thing don't work because you cannot identify the right moment. So, and this is what I meant, that literally the old wine keeps on coming in new bottles, and you have to pick the right moment out of nothing.
So will you tell us what training looks like for a chess player at that level? Is it not just, of course, the physical, not just how often and so on, but what are the types of training that you put yourself through to be able to go through those matches and all their demands?
So first off, the physical training, that's I used to do it every morning, so I can sort of bring it up like that. I would go run for half an hour, 40 minutes, do some weights, right after breakfast, and most of the team would join me. This was very important because you just needed to let go of stress, and it was even relaxing. Then we'd have lunch, meet up somewhere, and start to work. We could work for 4 or 5 hours before it's time for dinner. Then we break for dinner, and sometimes take a long walk as well, then come back, and then work 1 or 2 hours more. So something like 7 to 8 hours on a daily basis. We would do this 6 days a week, take 1 day off, and continue like this. This was for matches. For tournaments, if I have a trainer with me, we might do something like 4 or 5 hours, a bit less. And if I'm by myself, I could dial that down even more. Of course, with time, I started to get better at identifying how much time I could work optimally. And because we also have the situation that you're sitting there and for an hour and nothing is really happening. You're bashing away, nothing is really happening. My databases used to be a notebook or something like that. And now there's something like 14, 15 million games. There are like a couple of tens of thousands of correspondence games which come in every month. There's computer games. So the information flow is climbing, and it's been climbing for the last 15 years. So every year more than the other. And computers are getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So the style of working has changed. I like to say that once upon a time, we took the position, we tried to solve it. Now we press a button, the solution pops out, and we try to understand what the problem was. It's been flipped around. By this, I mean that, to give you an analogy, imagine that you're a very good driver or a taxi driver, and your skill was that you knew a city very well. So once upon a time, your knowledge of the city was your biggest strength. It's what you brought to the tournament. And then slowly, GPS apps and navigation, all sorts of things became available, so that there was no longer any way to distinguish between you and somebody who started driving yesterday. So how do you, if you can punch an address and immediately get the answers to what's the best way to go, how do you strengthen yourself? So what I would describe it as doing is, now I try to find how many different ways that are getting somewhere. You try to think, if all the drivers are going, if all the taxis are heading in this road, maybe there's going to be a traffic jam there. Can I do this? Do roads tend to be blocked for some reason? Are there other businesses in that area that I can know that can maybe add some? That's how. And it's very similar in chess, is that when the computer gives the answer, I need to ask as many questions as possible and so on to get because the answer comes too easily and it comes to everyone.
Sure.
So, but inevitably, the struggle is to remember the right position at the right time in the right way. And the thing is, very often I have seen so many similar positions that I should make sure that I'm not being tricked.
Yeah.
my memory isn't tricking me, that I'm not remembering just something similar. You want to know why the best move, and you want to know why. And in the book, there is one detailed story of the best chess game I will play in my life, probably. My game with Aronian in 2013. So what it was I had prepared this fantastic new idea, and we used it in the match in May. And over 6 months, so much other work had been coming and going. This had kind of faded in my memory. In January, I played against Aronian, who was a kind of nightmare opponent for me at that point. I was just losing all my games to him. But he walked into this line, and he walked into it with all the confidence of someone who's beaten me often and so on. So we get to this crucial position, and I make my prepared move, and he reacts, and 2 moves later, I suddenly realized that I was drawing a blank. I couldn't remember anything. I remembered the first move of the long line, and I remember the second move, but I couldn't remember anything else. And I completely froze because it seemed to me that I was dead lost. The only 2 fragments in my head which was sitting there was, I remembered that this line is good. It was our best idea. It's good for black, not for white. Though everything in my head told me that white is winning this position, I remember that black is better. And the second thing which came, so 10 minutes I sat there, I was so embarrassed. My best idea, and I was going to ruin it because I didn't bother checking it in 6 months. That's really terrible. You would prefer to lose a game because you just played badly, not throw away your best idea and lose. But for 15 minutes I sat there just embarrassed, angry, trying to understand why the position was good. Then suddenly I remembered a position where somehow my knight got to a square, the d3 square, and this was the only clue that popped up, and it popped up during these 15 minutes of anger, panic, whatever you want to call it. Then working backwards from this one clue, I managed another clue. Okay, the only way the knight can get there is if I move the bishop here, he captures my bishop, I capture it with the knight, and then my knight is in the range of the square. And then slowly, the rest of the puzzle started to slowly solve itself. And I still needed another 15 minutes. And my second was panicking. He says, we gave you the whole variation at home. Why are you thinking for half an hour? So anyway, I finally made the move. And the rest of the game, it more or less played itself, luckily. And it was really, there were people who called it the game of the century, even though it was only 2013. So I went home, and my trainer asked me, what was going on there with you? I said I couldn't remember anything because I forgot to check the line in the last 6 months. But luckily, I remembered there was one variation where this knight gets to d3, and that helped me solve everything. Then he looked in the notes for about 10 minutes. He says, there's not a single line where this knight gets to d3. So, but then he told me something interesting. He told me, but the variation you say makes perfect sense, but it's not anywhere in the notes. And then I thought for a while, and then we concluded that what had happened was I had briefly flicked through it with the computer and forgotten to record it in the notes, but that moment stayed with me rather than all the notes we had. So I hope that gives you some flavor of how easy it is to remember it. We have to remember something often by almost like a detective rather than necessarily problem solving. So.
I'd love to come to particular players and some particular games, but you mentioned a team, and you mentioned your trainer, you mentioned your seconds. It's from the outside such a solitary sport. Will you tell us what is the role of a team? Who are the kind of people on your team, and what do you look for when you look for a team?
Okay, briefly, your team is just someone who helps you with the workload. So even if I'm going to play at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock or whenever, if at night we identify certain problems, I can leave them to someone who's going to work for a couple of hours more while I get some sleep. Then I wake up in the morning. My second fills me in on all the details. That's some workload taken off my back. That's the first thing. The second thing is by implication, because if you're going to spend a lot of time with someone, you want someone with whom you're on reasonably good terms, you have common interests, something to help you get by. if these two needs are met, then I think the most important thing is someone who's very good at what you are bad at. So very often for my teams, I would pick people who play something that I'm unfamiliar with, or they're good at what I'm bad at, because I can learn from them. But by working with them, you hope that at least there's some osmosis, let's say. And the other thing I look for is someone who's well networked. By this I mean that someone who's in touch with enough people and discusses chess with enough of our colleagues that he can alert me to all the new ideas and trends that are happening. What are people talking about? What are people working at? Because this turns out to be as much a skill that you need in chess as in any walk of life. If you're sitting by yourself, you're working probably at a high level, but if you constantly meet and discuss with other people, each one will probably be working on a different problem, and you'll get a lot of starting points, and that saves you a lot of time. So these are roughly the qualities I look for.
You start your book with 2008 Bonn, your match against Kramnik. Why is that so central? Because it's not a chronological start. It's not even your first, say, world champion victory and so on. What about that game makes it so central to your life?
Actually, just like the Aronian game, which I just mentioned, we got to the car before the fifth game, and then about 10 minutes into our journey, I suddenly told Aruna, because exactly now, even though, it's literally like studying for an exam, I can start preparing for someone now, and I look at everything, and everything seems to be fine. And then 5 minutes before the game, 10 questions will pop into my head, and suddenly you realize you don't have a clear answer to all of them. That's, I think, a sign that your concentration and focus are increasing as you get closer to the game. So that's what happened here. Suddenly I panicked and realized there were 2 lines where I couldn't remember anything. In a way, what happened with Aronian a few years later. So I told Aruna, this is embarrassing, but if he gets into either of these positions, I don't even know what I'm supposed to do. It's not like I don't know what to do on move 30. I don't know what to do on move 12. So she said, okay, let me call some of the boys. So she called my first trainer, then she called my second. Then I picked up my phone and I called. And all of them had switched it off. It turns out that all of them decided, okay, he's gone now he doesn't need us. So let's switch off our phones and we'll go have lunch and then we'll go to sleep. And so none of them are picking up their phones. Then finally, as she says in the book, we can't do anything, go and play. And this is what I finally did. And luckily, Kramnik went for a line which I had checked, not for the line that I'd forgotten completely. The very moment he made that move, you feel such relief. And by the way, there have been occasions where you're so relieved that something wrong didn't happen that you then proceed to play very badly in this. But that's another story, not on this occasion. And this game turned out to be crucial to my overall victory. But I just thought it's a nice beginning because it shows how much uncertainty you have before every game. And that's what I wanted to convey most of all in the book about these matches. People think these are 2 well-prepared people. They're going to go there. They must know their facts by their fingertips. In fact, it's the opposite. If you have 2 well-prepared people, then in trying to outfox the other person, you often get into a soup.
That particular match, I think you said that you took what would be considered significant risk in one of the most high-stakes games, which is instead of your lifelong preferred opening of E4, you decided to play his lifelong preferred opening of D4, right? That sounds counterintuitive. Why did you take that risk? And an allied question, what is the role of risk in chess?
Well, in chess, there's an ever accumulating body of knowledge. So, if I play something new today, it gets published, and then it becomes common knowledge. And you invariably have to do something new tomorrow. This is risk as in getting set up for a game. So when you play a game, you have to bring something new table, some new idea that you have not had the time to prepare thoroughly. But there is a certain amount of going into the unknown here. And if you only play what is safe and has been checked a lot, chances are he will know why, your opponent will know why as well, and you won't get anywhere. So there's a certain amount of risk. Second, during the game, you will come to moments when you cannot have all the answers. You will have to make a move without having all the answers, and you should be comfortable taking that decision. You can call that intuition or risk, but it's the same thing. Here, this was a risk of the second sort, which is Kramnik was an uncomfortable opponent for me because I did not have the ability to pressurize him with the white pieces. So from 1989 till 2008, we had played over 100 games with each other. I remember the score. He was +8 with white. He had beaten me 8 times with the white pieces. I had beaten him 4 times with the black pieces, 2 times with the white pieces. So I found it very hard to land a punch with white. And more often I was able to hit him hard only when with black, which means I was counter-attacking, not attacking. And eventually in the match, I had to decide how am I going to pose more problems with white. And I decided that I would have more chances of getting the kind of position that I like playing if I switched to his favorite opening. Because his openings there were not so solid as they were against my favorite opening. And the second thing is, it was almost Pavlovian. Because I know that he blocks me so effectively, not only I convinced myself that playing against him was very boring, I convinced myself that my opening was very boring. The moment he sat across the table from me, you could see, oh, this is going to be a boring game. You know, you just get a vibe in your head. So what I thought was, if I play his opening against him, everything will feel so unfamiliar that I will at least feel in danger in every game. And that will create a situation where I'm forced to sit and work. And, you know, if the strategy had failed, I would not have mentioned it ever again. And it certainly wouldn't have made the book. I got lucky, which is that I took a calculated risk. I put a whole year of work behind it, and it paid off spectacularly. I mean, this was the best match I ever played. But I make that the highlight of the chapter on risk, because, you know, sometimes you do something that dramatic, and the payoff is so big that at least a few times in your life you have to explore that. The other point I really emphasize there is I took that risk for all the right reasons. I took it in one evening, and I took it just on a sense of, I'm going to do this because, you know, I'm going to live with the danger. I don't care, but I need a good match. I need an interesting match. I can't have the kind of match I normally have. And I also told my trainers, if in 4 months we decide it's a bad idea, it doesn't matter. We're going ahead with this. So you don't have to keep hesitating either. We can go with it. And somehow a lot of the decisions I took now seem to me genius because of the result. I'll grant you that. But it felt like just the right decision for all sorts of reasons.
So 2 questions before we open it up to the audience. Women and chess. Why are there, I know there are more now, but historically there have been much fewer women in a sport that one would imagine, because it's mind and not, I can understand differences in, say, physical stamina, physical often believed to be differences in the genders. Why are there such few women on the world chess scene?
The honest answer is I don't know, because I tend to agree with you that, there is a physical component to chess, but I don't think it explains why there's this performance gap. So to give you an idea, there's something like 1 woman in the top 100 men. And that's a huge gap. So I don't have an easy explanation. I would say that once upon a time, about 30 years ago, I remember if a woman beat a men's grandmaster, you would make all the major newspapers in the world. Now it goes unnoticed because it's routine. The number of women who beat grandmasters is so large nowadays that it doesn't get noticed. And if you take the top 1,000, there are significant numbers of women there, and so in other areas the gap is lessening, but at the top it still remains. I don't have an easy explanation. I have the feeling that it's a bit like saying 30 years ago, you could ask me, why are Indians not playing chess? I don't see any reason why they don't play chess. I mean, you could essentially apply the same argument 30 years ago to Indians, and so on. My own feeling is it hasn't happened yet. One day a couple of women will do it and then it'll just go on. But also it has to be noted that participation levels are lower yet still. Far more boys take to chess than girls. Or more significantly, far more boys stay in chess between the ages of 15 and 20 than girls. So that's where the participation levels change, and maybe that's a part of the explanation.
And just because you mentioned Indian chess, I think the measurable impact, and it's very hard normally to see measurable impact in sport, but when he was the first Indian grandmaster, there are now 65 Indian grandmasters in chess, which is phenomenal. What excites you about Indian chess today?
Basically, the number of youngsters who are taking to it. I mean, it's huge. You can just see tournaments where there were like 20 kids playing when I was at school, now often spill over to 1,000. So school competitions are often in that range. You pointed out there are 65 grandmasters. Many times that number of international masters. We dominate all the junior and sub-junior tournaments globally. We now have 4 grandmasters under the age of 15. So just by so many metrics, they're taking to it big numbers. And it's not even a secret anymore. More than one top grandmaster from abroad has said that the future belongs to India and so on. That's probably jumping the gun a bit. I mean, you have to actually take this and convert it into big numbers in the top 100, but I'm confident that we are in that direction.
Questions from the audience? We'll get a mic around to you. There's a question there.
Mr. Anand, you said about the role of artificial intelligence in chess. Mm-hmm. A significant moment was when Deep Blue had beaten at that time the highest elo-rated player.
So could you hold the mic closer to you? Thank you.
Yeah, the significant moment was Deep Blue was able to beat the highest elo-rated player, Kasparov. Today you have many programs which players are relying upon, be it AlphaZero, Stockfish. The question is, after the emergence of the artificial intelligence, has the inventiveness, the creativity of the middle game, has it been dented? The excitement of having some brilliant sacrifices of a Thal or genius of Murphy, that's not there. Are we pushing towards a percentage play, end game, crunch kind of a game?
Okay, so first things first. I think in terms, maybe for an insider's perspective, 1997 and Deep Blue was not that significant because the games weren't that revolutionary yet. But in terms of public perception, it seemed like some bridge had been crossed. But nonetheless, that marked a trend, and the trend has continued relentlessly, I would say. By 2004, I think most modern laptops could beat any human being. So, they've just gotten stronger and stronger. Then, if you come to the modern era, there's also some very inventive brute force programs came along. And now you have all these neural engines that work in a completely different way and are finding interesting stuff. As for creativity, I think creativity has never been higher in chess. It is unbelievably high because computers are showing us that almost every move is possible, first of all. I mean, we tended to be much too dogmatic 20, 30 years ago and even more 50 years ago, which is we just assume that very few moves work in a position. And computers show us that the depth is unbelievable. I don't think Tal and Morphy's kind of creativity is disappearing either, because when you're left to the board and when both players have no idea what's going on, they end up doing that out of necessity. You still get very fascinating games and quite a lot of them. I think the problem is if you're watching it with a computer, you can think that both of them are just playing badly, and that might be possible, but it's still very exciting. And even sophisticated, I would say, because they're trying to do something but not able to quite do it to perfection. So I don't think creativity has been affected at all. In fact, in many areas, we are beginning to understand chess at a new level.
We'll just take a question at the back and then come back to the front. Can we just get a mic there?
Yeah, chess is often used as a metaphor in a whole range of fields. You know, when people talk about war and politics, business, what do you think of that? And also, do you yourself tend to use chess a lot to see the wider world around you and use it as a way to understand what's happening in the world? Yeah.
Okay. So second question first. Yes, I often try to relate some interaction I have in civilian life, if I can put it that way, with some way I react to a problem on the chessboard. Whether that's the right way of doing it or accurate, I can't say, but for me it's the easiest to frame it in that way. Chess is generally used as a metaphor for strategy. I think that's a reasonably accurate beginning, but you know, the way people use it depends on their level of understanding of the game. Often they do it quite badly, and it's tiresome. No, I've, for instance, heard that Putin plays three-dimensional chess. Yeah, I have no idea what that is. So you can get chess used in very colorful ways. For me, nothing is more annoying than watching an ad where in a position where I can barely make out two pieces, but I know that it's impossible to give mate. In that situation, some kid will do checkmate, and you know the ad ends. I hate that. So, and I've also shot some ads, and I'll just tell you, just to show how chess players and other people look at the world. The director says, you know, we have set up this position, it's very nice, and I'll immediately say, no, but this position is illegal. That king can't be there. He says, yes, but it looks good on the camera. So. You see, I want that king to be in the light. I said, I don't care, it's not legal. And we go on like this. But anyway, so I often try to think of, and if someone who plays chess is then able to use that idea to think creatively, then yes, I think it works. But it's very difficult to describe it. The most I would say is, where I think it's genuinely helpful, is when I make a move, when I do something, I assume my opponent is going to make the best move as well. And if I do that at chess, I try to do that outside of chess.
There were a couple of questions in the front.
Mr. Anand, you had mentioned in the very beginning about chess players being traditionally associated with very high level of IQ, and you mentioned relatively less EQ. But then you also mentioned that when you are playing, a big component of your success depends on reading the mind of your opponent. Now, if you are to read the mind of your opponent, you obviously have to have a high level of EQ, because reading his mind, his emotional state, etc., obviously requires high level of emotional quotient. So, in your view, what would be the right blend or composition of IQ and EQ to make, success of the Sambar thing? And you also mentioned that you lost a couple of games because you felt euphoric. So obviously the EQ thing was a bit of an issue. How do you explain that? I feel that if you really have to read the minds of your opponent, one has to be equally high in EQ. And I recollect having read Daniel Goleman's book on emotional intelligence, where he mentioned that a player like Bobby Fischer, he had, I think Mensa had found that his EQ was, about his IQ was 160 plus. And he was brilliant, all of us know that. But then in his personal life, he was a miserable failure. How do you explain this quagmire of EQ and IQ, and what would be the perfect, if not the perfect, approximation of the EQ and IQ blend for success of a top-class international player in chess?
Okay, I think I might have used EQ a bit loosely. So it's not really what I meant. I meant more in they can be inward looking, not that social. That doesn't necessarily mean they're unable to read other people's thoughts or react, but that chess is one of these fields, and there are other fields that often, I think, scientists can easily get lost in their own world. They only want to talk to other people who are familiar with their subject. You can become a bit introverted or even worse, inward looking. Also, really reading other people's minds at chess is not entirely connected with emotional intelligence necessarily. I think you can use often it involves nothing more than sitting there and hearing your opponent breathing. And if sometimes and suddenly you hear them panting, then you know that maybe there's something interesting happening. I think chess players can surprise you in all areas, but generally chess is one of those fields where you can very easily get lost, which is that you want to think about it all the time, and then everything else feels like a distraction. I definitely have those phases. And there are chess players who have it even worse, I think.
There was another question in the front. If you could just, it should be on.
Hello.
Yeah.
This is related to the famous Spassky-Fischer match in Reykjavik, I think. Did Fischer win it psychologically, or was he really more skilled than Spassky? How would you rate it?
I would say that Fischer was a stronger chess player at that point. But I think Spassky lost the match psychologically because he accepted that version of events. In a sense, Spassky also felt that Fischer was the stronger player. And what's, I think, worse for Spassky is that he liked Fischer. He genuinely liked him, like an elder brother. So he wanted to, when Fischer kept threatening to walk out of the match, Spassky kind of didn't push it as hard as the Soviets would have liked. And he got into trouble when he went back for that reason. Of course, once they started playing, then eventually Fischer's strength came through. But normally he wouldn't even have gotten that chance. And if Spassky started with a 2-point lead, and then they started playing, I don't think Fischer's chess strength was so high that he could afford a 2-point deficit, necessarily. So I think the chances were very close to even at that stage, if Spassky was not a favorite already. But Spassky was very kind, and he almost couldn't bring himself to fight till the score turned negative for him. I think only when he was 2 points down, which is that he had suffered 4 losses, could he bring himself to start fighting fully. And by then it was really too late. So probably, yes, he did lose from the inside.
I think we have time for one final question. There's a question at the back.
In what way has chess changed today from the Bobby Fischer days?
So could you hold the mic closer, please?
In what way is the chess of today different from the chess of Bobby Fischer?
The biggest change has been the whole light computer revolution. When Bobby Fischer played chess games were transmitted by telex machines. You had to. The only way you could find out what had happened in that match is if your newspaper published something. Now, I mean, from that to now, when you can watch a game live, full video with commentary and so on, it's been a gulf. But I'll give you some more examples. When I went for the World Junior in 1984, I heard that a magazine which would come to India only in October, so I was playing there in August. I heard that the Scottish player already had a copy because, of course, it was published in Yugoslavia in July, and then it took a couple of months to circulate. So I immediately ran to the reception, found out that Scottish player's room, and then ran to his room hoping to ask him if I could borrow the book. When I got to his room, there was a large queue there already. So that's how information used to circulate. Then I remember getting my first fax machine in like 1993 so that I could get the games by fax individually. Can you imagine if you wanted to get 1,000 games or something? Now routinely I just download a database of 8 or 9 million games. I mean, it'll take 20, 30 minutes to download and boom, it's there. But once upon a time, imagine trying to get this stuff faxed over. And by the way, just as an aside, one day my father explained to me, don't tell anyone about this fax machine because it's illegal to connect it to the second phone number that I got. So something like that. Anyway, yeah, apparently you had needed a fax license in those days. But once upon a time, I could beat a computer. In fact, I played a match against 6 very strong computers at the same time. And I beat them 4.5, 1.5. Now, it's a nice story. 2 days ago, my son wanted me to play chess on his computer, which is my older computer. So anyway, I went and sat there, and we were playing on this chess kid. And he said, Appa, I want you to beat all these levels for me. So I beat a couple of levels, and I played level 10. And after a few attempts, I told him, look, it's very difficult. I'm not able to. He was very disappointed. He said, but I need that star. So I said, I can't help it. And then I checked it. In fact, that's the maximum level where it no longer makes any weak moves. It plays to its full strength. And of course, that is then it's just a strong laptop with a strong playing engine. It's not a big surprise that I couldn't beat it. So, but he was very disappointed because he thought if he uses me, he'll get that star for that one. Anyway, so once upon a time, you couldn't use a computer for anything more than as a light calculator. You could check errors in the next 2-3 moves. Now they are at either several hundred million positions per second, or they're doing huge probability trees and generating just fantastic ideas. Plus, all the rapid formats have become part of the game. So now we play official 30-minute championships, 15-minute championships, 5-minute championships. So the number of games we play every year has gone up by a factor of 4 or 5. Including faster controls, but 4 or 5, which means that it's getting exhausting. In 1983, the top 10 in the world, the average age was 36. About 3 years ago, the average age of the top 10 was 22. And that was because me, Kramnik, and Topalov were still in the top 10, 3 of us. So you remove the 3 of us and it plummets even further. So it's gotten younger, it's gotten faster, it's got sped up, and it seems to be just growing exponentially. But and one more big change. When Fischer was playing, in the top 10, there were like 8 or 9 Soviets. Now, no country occupies more than 3 players. So you have just much more diversity. And that is again because access to the game is no longer geographic. It's essentially technological and communication based.
Pretty much all the time we have for one final question. How does your wife feel about chess?
Oh, I will. I think it must be a bit of right after our wedding, I had to go to a chess tournament because I already committed to it. And so,
You took her on a honeymoon tournament.
well, so her friends and all asked her, where are you going for the honeymoon? And she said, they were expecting something like, Paris or whatever. I said, Dortmund, which is like some industrial town. I mean, even in Germany, if you tell them, oh, honeymoon was in Dortmund, then what? And so at the first tournament, she had no idea what was going on. And what she liked most about that theater, because it was very dark and cool, that she would just go off to sleep in the afternoons while I was playing. Now I think she understands the game very well. She's not really sat and studied the game at any way, but she has watched me play and watched everyone play often enough. I think she knows the terminology and what drives everyone better than her. And of course, she can read what chess players are thinking. So I think by now it's just a big part of her life as well. So again, there's one nice story in the book, which is that usually after a game, she'll try to cheer me up. I mean, a game that has gone badly, of course. She'll try to cheer me up. And but she'll usually, well, what can you say to someone who's lost? Tomorrow will be better, whatever. But once I'd heard this thing just once too often, and on top of that, my tournament was really going badly. So she said, well, cheer up and, try to forget this game and play the next one and so on. So I snapped at her that this is all very well, but if she knew some good idea in the Berlin defense or the Sveshnikov, that would be more helpful than this general fluff. And she also snapped by this point because she was trying to cheer me up, but there's no way to cheer you up, no? So she said, if I knew the reputation of the Berlin, why the hell am I married to you? And then we both started laughing because we both understood that, she's trying to be nice. I'm not letting her, and maybe I'm beyond cheering now. And so we kind of let it go. But it's, I think, one of my favorite bits in the book.
Please do use the opportunity to buy the book. I will say it's fascinating to read a chess book that reads like a thriller, but also like a mental thriller, because pretty much as Anand has spoken, it dives into what it takes mentally, and that's risk, strategy, payoffs, failures, all of that. I think it's a wonderful opportunity not just to dive into the mind of a world champion, but to take lessons from it that are not obvious but oblique. Thank you so much for both your candor and for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,